We now come to the 10-minute rule motion. Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require the Secretary of State to establish national policy guidelines in respect of children with a parent in prison, including for the identification of the children of prisoners at the point of sentence and for accountability for providing support to the children of prisoners and for connected purposes. I want to start by saying what this bill is not about. It is not about prisoners. There is some good and important work being done with prisoners and their families. We know there's often a value in maintaining family ties. It helps prisoners cope with their sentences and makes it less likely they'll reoffend when they're released. But this is not about them. It is about their children, some of whom will have contact with their parent in prison, many of whom won't. If the parent is inside for domestic violence or for sexual offences involving children, or indeed if the child was the victim of the parent's crime, there might well not be contact. Or if there's been a long history of criminal behaviour, of addiction, of violence, or if there just wasn't ever much of a family unit in the first place. So we don't start with the prisoner's well-being, we start with what is in the child's best interest. And we start from a difficult place because we simply don't know how many children have a parent in prison. We don't know who they are, where they are, who is looking after them, not in any kind of systemic way. They are the invisible children. As Sarah Burrows, the Chief Exec of Children Heard and Seen, who is here today, is a charity which does excellent work to identify, mentor and support children with parents in prison. As she's fond of saying, we know exactly how many Labradors there are in this country, yet we don't know how many children have a parent in prison. And that is why this bill is needed. I'm not going to prejudge now what a statutory mechanism for identifying and supporting children with a parent in prison could look like, although I do want to pay tribute to Sergeant Ross Massey of Thames Valley Police and the work he's led on Operation Paramount. And I do think that the unique child identifier number being proposed by Labour's education team might play a role. In 2019, CRESS estimated that around 312,000 children a year were affected by parental imprisonment. 17,000 of them, it would be their mother. The MOJ has now commissioned a BOLD, that's Better Outcomes Through Linked Data report, which will use government data to estimate how many children have a parent in prison, and those statistics will be released on 13th of June. There has been a lot of work behind the scenes to get us to this point, and I particularly want to thank the Honourable Member for Edisbury for his help, and the Children's Commissioner who has been backing this bill, and also for the various ministers who've met us over the years. But we need more than just a snapshot of how many children are affected. We need a mechanism so that at the point when an adult is sentenced to imprisonment, someone finds out whether there are any children involved, and someone is then responsible for making sure those children are okay. We know that at the moment this isn't always picked up. Sometimes the question isn't asked. Sometimes the prisoner doesn't want the authorities to know because they're worried the kids will be taken into care. Often schools have no idea. Children Heard and Seen see cases where children have simply been left to fend for themselves, and I want to mention a few. A man went to prison for sexual offences. It was only after the house was targeted by vigilantes that a victim support caseworker found that his 15-year-old daughter was living there on her own. A criminologist conducting research in a women's prison was told by a prisoner that her two daughters were living on their own without any money for food and sanitary protection. A 16-year-old boy was arrested at the same time as his parents. He was released shortly afterwards and left to be the sole carer of his 8-year-old brother. An employer requested a welfare check after a woman hadn't shown up to work for 2 months. When the police went round to the address, they discovered her 15-year-old son living on his own. There was no gas or electricity, and he'd been getting up and going to school every single day without anyone knowing that his mum was in prison. Kinship carers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, siblings often play an important role in stepping up when a parent goes to prison, and they need support to do so. But there's also a real risk children will end up living somewhere entirely unsuitable with people who will abuse them, neglect them and exploit them. More often than not, however, there is a parent, usually the mother, at home, but children can still be badly affected. One of the bloggers on the Children Heard and Seen website said, "We're not the victims, we are the collateral damage." There's an emotional loss, a sense of abandonment. There's perhaps a sense of injustice if they feel that their mum or dad has been wrongfully jailed. Or there's anger that their mum or dad has chosen to commit a crime, not caring what happens to them as a result. On a practical level, it could mean a big change in the family's financial situation, having to move house, move schools, going on to free school meals. having to change your names and leave town altogether because it's been all over the papers that your dad is a sex offender, and I've met a family that happened to. And perhaps most damaging of all, it's the stigma and the shame of being associated with a parent's crime, being bullied at school, being seen as trouble by the teachers. As one mother said, I'd moved areas because I felt like I was being watched all the time. People were talking and we were being discriminated against when it was not something that we've done. Kids are innocent and I've had to move schools, which has been more upheaval. It's just a nightmare. Children heard and seen use the hashtag #ItWasn'tMe. The child hasn't done anything wrong, but in so many ways the child is being punished too. The research from Crest that I mentioned earlier from 2019 found that children of prisoners are at risk of significantly worse outcomes than children not affected by parental imprisonment, including lifelong mental health problems and being involved in the criminal justice system themselves later in life. It's been suggested that 65% of boys with a parent in prison go on to offend. Others say that a child with a parent in prison is 3 or 4 times more likely to get into trouble. Although it is difficult to separate out other factors in a child's upbringing, the same factors that might have led their parent to become involved in crime, like poverty or family instability. What is clear is that by supporting and mentoring children, it is possible to break that cycle. I've met many adults from all walks of life, still deeply affected by the trauma of their childhood experience. We've met in this building, we've shared stories. What is striking is just how difficult it is for them to talk about it many years down the line. A few months ago, I watched a brilliant documentary, The Edge of Everything, about Ronnie O'Sullivan, whose father was jailed for murder when he was 17. And it was actually heartbreaking to hear him talk about it, to see the pain writ large on his face some 30 years later. He's #1 in the world, he's winning the world championship, yet he's still very much an experience that lives with him. Other celebrities have also spoken out about their childhood experiences. John Bishop was 6 when his father went to jail. He has said that visiting was a dehumanising experience. We were treated like cattle. The injustice my dad suffered had a massive impact on the person I am. Ramesh Ranganathan has also spoken out about visiting his dad, who was serving a 2-year sentence for fraud. It was horrific, he said. You just become numb to it. Those experiences definitely had a profound effect on me. Every child's story will be different. Some children who have a parent in prison now might be doing just fine, but the chances are that they are not. So we need to know who they are, where they are, how they are coping, who is looking after them, because they're not to blame, because it wasn't them.
The question is that the honourable member has leave to bring in the bill. As members of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Mr Clive Betts, Sir Robert Buckland, Andrew Gwynn, Ms Harriet Harman, Dame Diana Johnson, Tim Lawton, John McDonnell, Jess Phillips, Edward Timpson, Nadia Whittam, Munira Wilson and myself.
Kerry McCarthy.
Children Parental Imprisonment Bill.
Second reading what day?
14th of June.
14th of June. Thank you. The clerk will now